I don't know if you will come across this video, but in case you see it before it is taken down, I ask that you take to heart every truth you hear, because this won't be here for long. Please tell us where you are watching this video from so we can continue to pray for you and your family. Thank you. I will now begin sharing today's video. There is something coming, something big, something I wish I never had to tell anyone. But I have no choice. What I am about to share may sound unreal, but it is real. It will likely shake nations. It will bring fear. It will bring pain, and it may lead to the end of many things people hold dear. If you are seeing this before it happens, listen carefully. This is not a story. This is a warning. You need to be ready, not just ready with food or supplies, but ready in your heart, ready in your mind, ready to face what is coming. Before this experience I thought I understood the plan. I believed once certain things were done, the world would settle. I believed the operations we carried out in Iran were enough to control what might happen. I thought the plan was final. I thought the threat was contained. I was wrong. What I saw changed everything. What I heard changed everything. What Jesus showed me changed everything. This is bigger than any human plan, bigger than any military strategy, bigger than anything I ever imagined. And it is coming. If you hear this, pay attention. Do not ignore it. What is about to happen will begin with one plan, but it will not stop there. That first plan is just the beginning. I never wanted to share this. I am a soldier. I follow orders. I serve quietly. But I cannot stay silent, because what I saw was real. I have been in the Army for 14 years. I joined when I was young. I wanted to serve my country. I wanted to protect people. I believed in what we were trained to do. For the past 2 years, I have been based in Iran. It was part of a long operation. I worked with a team, but most of what we did is classified. There are things I cannot tell anyone, things I cannot explain. Some of it would shock people. Some of it is about the suffering of people, the hidden persecution, especially Christians, that I saw with my own eyes. I saw families living in fear, people hiding their faith, people being silenced by powers that want control. I saw oppression that is quiet but strong. I saw plans being made to gain control of nations. Some of these nations have, over time, become tools for evil. I knew the work we were doing was part of bigger moves, moves that would change the lives of many. I never imagined that my own life would be the moment that opened my eyes to what is really coming. I never imagined I would see beyond what we can normally see. I never imagined I would understand the real price of what is about to happen. My mission in Iran was intense. I was stationed there for over 2 years. Most people do not understand what it means to live in a place where everything is watched, where every move is controlled, and where fear hides behind every corner. I worked in an operations office. My duty was to observe, report, and coordinate. I had access to information most people would never see: plans, strategies, movements of armies. I saw the tools being used to control nations, to influence governments, to pressure people into submission. There were things happening that I could not talk about, things about the nation and the persecution of Christians that would shock anyone if they knew. I saw families living in silence. I saw people praying quietly in hidden rooms, whispering words that might cost them their lives. There were also plans in place to regain freedom for the nation. But those plans are hidden for now. They will be unveiled when the right time comes. I cannot share all of it. Not yet. But I knew something bigger than what we were working on was coming. Something I could never have guessed. There were things I saw in Iran that I wish I could forget. Things I saw that I would never want anyone to experience. People living in fear every day. People hiding their faith. Christians being watched, threatened, and punished quietly. I saw the pain in their eyes. I heard the whispers of their prayers. I saw how much they suffered without anyone knowing, and I knew that behind all of it there were plans. Plans that would decide the future of many nations. Some of these plans were meant to bring destruction. Some were meant to control people, some were meant to silence faith and hope. And yet, there were plans of liberation too, plans that were waiting to be revealed. I could see them, but not fully. I could feel them, but not act on them. I never imagined that one moment in my life would open my eyes to everything. That one moment would show me the path of nations, the path of destruction, and the path of revival. I did not know it then, but I was about to witness what no human eyes have ever truly seen. It was just a normal day. I was at my desk, going through reports. Nothing felt wrong. I had no sickness, no warning, no pain. Then suddenly, it hit me. My chest felt heavy. I could not breathe. My hands went weak. I tried to stand, but my legs would not hold me. The world around me started to fade. Voices became distant. Everything went blurry. I did not understand at first. I had no history of heart problems. My family had no heart issues. There was no reason for this. It happened suddenly, without warning. Then everything went black. I was gone from my body. They later told me I had died. My heart had stopped for 7 minutes. 7 minutes where I left the world I knew. I cannot explain what it felt like. There was no fear, there was no pain. I was aware, but not in my body. It was like floating, like existing without limits. And in those 7 minutes, I saw things I can never forget. When I left my body, everything was quiet. There was no sound from the office, no voices, no machines. Nothing I knew remained. The air felt different. Not warm, not cold, but full. Full of something I had no words for. My body was gone, but I was more aware than I had ever been, more aware than any moment in 14 years of military training, more aware than the sharpest briefing I had ever sat in. Every sense I had was amplified beyond measure, and yet there was no fear, none at all. Then I realized I was not in the office anymore. I was standing, but I had no weight. I could see everything at once, but it was not normal. The world looked different. My perspective kept shifting. One moment I was close to the ground, the next I was elevated, floating above it all, watching everything simultaneously. It was like being given eyes that could look in every direction at once, and a mind that could hold all of it without breaking. In front of me, I saw the earth. At first, I thought it would look like a map. I expected the familiar shapes I had studied in military briefings, the outlines, the borders, the terrain markings, but it was not green and blue like I expected. The land, the seas, the sky. I saw red everywhere. Blood, covering everything. It was not the red of fire, not the red of autumn leaves or sunset skies. It was the deep, dark, unmistakable red of blood. It moved. It spread like water across a floor, slow and unstoppable. Across every coast, every mountain range, every city. It seeped into valleys. It stained rivers. It climbed over borders as if borders meant nothing to it, because in that moment they meant nothing at all. I could not understand it at first. My heart felt heavy. I wanted to turn away, but I could not. I could see every continent, every country, and it was all red. I watched Africa. I watched Asia. I watched Europe. I watched the Americas, north and south. I watched the islands and the great oceans. Every piece of land I had ever studied, every nation I had ever heard mentioned in briefings, every place I had ever seen on any map, covered. The color was absolute. There were no clean spots, no safe corners, no untouched places. Everywhere the eye could see, the earth bled. Then I heard it, a sound, a cry, not one voice, millions, men, women, children. Their pain echoed across the world. It was coming from everywhere. I have heard terrible sounds in my years of service. I have been in situations where people were in real distress. I have heard the sounds of despair, of loss, of extreme fear, but nothing in 14 years of seeing hard things came close to what I heard in that moment. These were not the cries of a crowd or a crowd at a distance. They were personal. Each voice was distinct. Each one carried its own story. I could almost feel the specific pain behind every single cry. A mother separated from her child, a man watching his life's work burn, an elderly woman alone in darkness, a young boy who did not understand what was happening around him. Each one was clear. Each one was real. At first I thought it was only Iran. I knew the plans for the president there. I knew what had been set in motion. I knew what operations had been coordinated. I thought the pain I heard was local. But it was not. It was everywhere. Even America. Even other nations that had nothing to do with what I knew. I felt fear, confusion, and sadness all at once. I could not understand what was happening. Then, out of nowhere, he appeared. Jesus. Standing beside me, calm but serious. I could not speak at first. I did not know how to react. One moment I was alone, seeing the cries of the world. The next, he was there. Jesus. Not slowly appearing, not stepping forward from a distance. Just standing beside me as though he had always been there, and I had only just become able to see him. He did not need to say much at first. His presence told me everything. Peace mixed with seriousness. I felt small, not in a crushing way, but in a way that made sense. Like standing at the edge of an ocean and finally understanding how big the water is. I was small, yes, but I was not nothing. He did not make me feel worthless. He made me feel seen, completely, entirely seen. Not just what I had done in my career, not just the soldier others knew, but everything, every thought I had hidden, every doubt I had carried, every moment of exhaustion I had never admitted to anyone. He knew all of it and was still standing there beside me. He showed me that the cries I heard were real, not just fear, not just pain. They were the tears of people who would soon face destruction. People across nations, many I did not even know. Men and women who would lose everything. Children who would be caught in the suffering through no fault of their own. Who had made no decisions, chosen no sides, started nothing. Children who would simply be present when the world broke open. He told me that these cries would start at the beginning of March. They would echo softly at first, quiet enough that many would dismiss them. The first days would feel like distant thunder, a rumble that people would explain away, chalk up to tension, attribute to politics or conflict already known. But by the 9th of March, the pain would grow. It would stop being distant. It would be immediate. It would spread across nations the way fire spreads across dry grass, fast, hungry, and with no clear edge. He told me that it would not stop after the 9th. That date was not an end. It was a threshold. Once crossed, the momentum would build. More days, more nations, more people. The suffering would compound and expand. I tried to imagine it, but I could not. My mind, trained as it was, could not hold the scale of what he was describing. That is when he gave me a vision. Not words, not a lecture or a briefing. A vision. I saw Iran first. I recognized it immediately, not just from maps, but because I had lived there for over 2 years. I knew its landscape, its roads, its sounds. I had walked its earth. I had breathed its air. In the vision, I could see every part of it at once. The cities, the mountains, the desert stretches, the homes where people lived their hidden lives. I saw the plans that had been put in motion there, the operations I had been part of, the larger strategy I had only partially understood from my position. I could see all of it now, the full shape of it. They would happen. There was no stopping them. The machinery was already in motion. Lives would be affected, not small numbers, large numbers, men in uniform and men not in uniform, women who had never chosen to be near any conflict. I saw property lost, homes that families had built over generations reduced in moments. I saw cities suffer, streets I had walked through, markets where people had gone about their ordinary days, neighborhoods where children had played. I saw them broken. But then something shifted in the vision. Something changed in the air, in the tone of what I was seeing. Through the destruction, through the smoke and the loss, I saw something else beginning to emerge, like a plant pushing through cracked stone, like light coming through a gap in a wall that used to be solid. He showed me that this action, though painful, would bring freedom for many people. Many who had been oppressed for years, not decades, years upon years upon years. Generations of people who had been kept silent, kept afraid, kept in shadows. I saw them beginning to lift their heads. I saw the hidden prayers becoming spoken prayers. I saw the underground faith, the whispered worship I had personally witnessed during my time there, beginning to rise into the open. The liberation would not come without cost. That was clear. The price would be high. But it would come, and when it came, it would be real. Then he showed me that this action would not exist in isolation. Nothing that would happen in Iran would stay in Iran. The world is connected. The alliances are real. The debts between nations, political, military, ideological, do not disappear when a conflict begins. They activate. He showed me that the action would trigger others. Nations allied with Iran would respond. They would not remain quiet. They would not simply issue statements or call meetings. They would move, quietly at first, then with force. He showed me 3 nations that would join with Iran. I will not name all 3 at this moment because some of what I saw is still unfolding, and there are things that must be left for the right time. But I saw them clearly. I saw their leaders. I saw their military systems. I saw the communication between them, the planning, the coordination, the shared understanding of what they intended to do. They would not act impulsively. This was not a reaction made in anger. What I saw had the shape of something planned well in advance. The kind of planning that takes months, maybe years. The kind of coordination that goes deeper than public alliances, that lives in back channels and secret agreements, that moves beneath the surface of what the world sees on news reports or diplomatic summaries. They would work together to strike at America. And they would not strike randomly. Every choice had a reason. Every target had been selected with precision. This was not an act of rage. It was surgical, calculated. It was designed to hurt specifically, to remove capability, to create confusion, to knock out the systems that allow a nation to defend itself and respond. He showed me 4 states, 4 specific locations within America's borders: Montana, North Dakota, Wyoming, and South Dakota. As he showed me Montana, I understood immediately. The missile silos, the nuclear facilities. I had known of their existence. Every soldier with my level of clearance had some awareness of the strategic geography of their own country, but seeing it from above, seeing it with the clarity the vision gave me, I understood the full weight of it. Montana held some of the most significant strategic weapons America possessed, weapons that project power, weapons that act as deterrents. Remove them, damage them, disrupt them, and you remove one of the most powerful reasons other nations think twice before escalating. That is exactly why it would be a target, not to start a nuclear event, to remove the threat of one in America's hands. In North Dakota, he showed me the Air Force bases, not just buildings, networks, command centers that held together the coordination of enormous military operations, communication hubs, the kind that feed information to other locations, that allow commanders in different places to act together, to know what the other knows, to respond in concert. Cut those lines and you do not just damage one base, you fragment the entire system. You make the right hand unable to speak to the left hand. You create confusion at the highest levels of military response, and confusion kills faster than any weapon. In Wyoming, he showed me defense systems and training centers, the places where soldiers are prepared, where doctrine is taught, where the next generation of military capability is shaped, strategic facilities that are not flashy, not headline-making, but are absolutely essential to the long-term functioning of a military force. Strike them and you disrupt not just what is happening now, but what would have happened next. In South Dakota, I saw the bomber bases, the support systems that allow aircraft to project force across vast distances, the coordination infrastructure for air defense, the systems that watch the sky, that track what enters and does not enter American airspace. When those are gone, or damaged, or thrown into chaos, the nation becomes exposed in ways that are difficult to communicate in simple terms. He showed me all of this not with clinical detachment, but with weight, with grief. I could feel that this was not information being shared because it was exciting. It was not a war briefing designed to energize a room. It was a warning given with sorrow about what human choices were building toward. I saw the strike happen, not as a prediction with uncertainty, as a vision with terrible clarity. The moment it began, the ground shook. Not just in one place. Almost simultaneously across those 4 states, the violence arrived. Explosions erupted in Montana, North Dakota, Wyoming, and South Dakota, with a speed and coordination that made it clear this had been rehearsed, that every timing had been calculated, that the people executing it had done so with cold precision. In Montana, the missile silos were hit. I watched fires break out across multiple sites, not just one. Thick black smoke climbed into the sky, visible from miles away, visible from heights that made the smoke look like wounds on the earth. Military equipment was destroyed, not just vehicles or buildings, but systems that had taken years to build and maintain. People ran for safety in all directions. Many could not escape. The speed of the strike made escape impossible for those nearest the impacts. I saw them. I will not describe it further. In North Dakota, the Air Force bases were hit with a strategy aimed specifically at the communication infrastructure. Lines were cut. Command centers were damaged, some beyond immediate function. Soldiers who had been ready to respond could not coordinate. Commanders tried to reach other commanders and found silence on the other end. The confusion that set in was not panic. These were trained people. But it was real, and it was deep, and it spread faster than any physical damage. The inability to know what was happening in real time, the inability to pass orders and receive confirmation, created a paralysis that the attackers had specifically designed for. In Wyoming, the defense systems were disrupted in ways that would not be fully understood until days later. Training centers were damaged. Some of the people inside them were soldiers who had been preparing for conflicts in other parts of the world, who had not imagined the conflict would arrive on the ground they trained on. The country's ability to mount an immediate organized defense response in those first hours was significantly weakened. In South Dakota, the bomber bases were struck and supplies were destroyed. Fuel, equipment, the logistical foundations that allow aircraft to be deployed. The coordination for air defense in a significant portion of the country was thrown into chaos, not destroyed entirely, but badly disrupted, in exactly the ways that would matter most in the hours immediately following the initial strikes. I saw fear spread across the nation, not just in those 4 states, across all of it, because every American with access to news, to any form of communication, would know within hours what had happened, and knowing that your country had been struck, not by a distant attack on foreign soil, not by a cyber attack that lived in screens, but by physical destruction of American ground, on American territory, changes something in a population that has not experienced that kind of thing in living memory. He showed me people in cities far from those 4 states, in cities with nothing military nearby, feeling the fear just as powerfully. Because fear does not require proximity, fear travels at the speed of information, and in the first hours after those strikes, information would travel everywhere. But the first strike was only the beginning. He showed me that this would grow. Other nations would get involved, the alliances would activate, the conflict would pull in more actors, more decisions, more points of no return, and the escalation would not slow, it would accelerate. After the attacks, I saw the darkness come, not just night, not just the ordinary darkness that comes at the end of every day and lifts again with morning. This was something different, something total. The power supply failed, not in one region, not in one grid sector, across the nation. Cities went black. I watched it happen, as if from above. The lights of American cities, which from any height looked like networks of gold and white, like proof of civilization, like something almost beautiful when seen from a distance. I watched them go out, one cluster, then another, not gradually, like a controlled shutdown, all of it. The streetlights that line every road, the lights inside homes where families were in the middle of ordinary evenings, the lights in hospitals where patients were in the middle of procedures, in the middle of recovery, in the middle of fighting to stay alive. Gone. Machines stopped. Not just lights, everything that depended on the grid. Machines that breathed for people who could not breathe on their own. Machines that monitored hearts and communicated the numbers to nurses at stations. Machines that kept medications at exact temperatures. Machines in every factory, every warehouse, every facility in the country. Silent. The darkness lasted for 5 days. 5 full days. I tried to hold that number in my mind and understand what it meant. Not a few hours of inconvenience. Not a day of frustration and hardship that ends with relief. 5 days of complete blackout covering a nation of hundreds of millions of people. Communication lines were down alongside the power, not just phones requiring charge. The infrastructure itself was damaged. The towers, the relay systems, the backbone of the internet, the broadcast systems for radio and emergency alerts, all of it compromised. People were not just sitting in the dark, they were sitting in silence, cut off from every other person they had ever known, every source of information, every reassurance that the person they loved in another city was still alive. I saw panic grow. I watched it move through the population the way the darkness itself had moved, rapidly, from one group to the next, feeding on itself. People who had been calm in the first hours, who had candles and flashlights and a reasonable expectation that this would be sorted within a day, began to change by the second day. By the third day, the character of the panic had shifted from fear of the unknown into something more desperate, something more physical. Businesses stopped functioning. The systems that allow commerce to operate, the digital systems, the electronic payment systems, the inventory systems, the logistics platforms that tell trucks where to go and warehouses what to receive, all of them required power and connectivity that no longer existed. Factories could not work. The production of everything stopped. Food delivery stopped. The trucks that carry food to stores every day stopped receiving routing information. Stores that had not already been emptied by people preparing for an unknown emergency ran out of resupply. Transportation networks went to pieces. Fuel pumps did not work. Traffic signals were dark. The roads that normally move people and goods efficiently became chaos. I saw airports unable to function, aircraft on the ground, unable to communicate, unable to confirm clearances, unable to coordinate with any authority. Passengers stranded. Flights suspended indefinitely. The movement of people between places, which in normal times we take so completely for granted that we forget it, requires enormous systems to function, had simply stopped. Hospitals struggled in ways that I could barely watch. The backup generators that hospitals maintained for exactly these moments worked, for a time. But 5 days is a long time for a generator. Fuel needed to be replenished. Supply chains for fuel had stopped working. One by one, across the country, the backups that were never designed for this length of outage began to fail. And when they failed, the consequences inside those buildings were immediate and irreversible. People who depended on electricity for their most basic survival, for oxygen machines, for dialysis, for the equipment that managed conditions that would otherwise be rapidly fatal, suffered the most. Many died during those 5 days, not from the attacks directly, from the absence of the systems they needed to stay alive, from the gap between what medicine could do for them and what medicine could access without power. The darkness was not just the absence of light. It was the collapse of every assumption that modern life is built on. The assumption that when you turn on a switch, the light will come. The assumption that when you need emergency help, someone will answer. The assumption that the systems around you are stable, that tomorrow will be like yesterday in the basic ways that matter. All of those assumptions were gone. And people, stripped of those assumptions, were stripped of something close to their sense of reality. After the darkness, I saw the economy collapse. Not slowly, not the way an economy slows during a recession, where the decline is visible over months and argued about in newspapers. This was sudden, the kind of sudden that doesn't give anyone time to prepare or adapt. Banks closed, not because they chose to close, because they could not function. The systems that allow banks to know who has what, to process transactions, to move money between institutions. All of it required the digital infrastructure that the outage had destroyed. When the power came back, the systems did not simply come back with it. The recovery of that kind of infrastructure takes time. Weeks, possibly months. In the meantime, people who needed to access their accounts to move money to pay for things could not. People could not access their money. Savings accounts that existed as numbers in databases became inaccessible. Cash, which people had used to some extent even in digital times, became the only medium of exchange. But cash was limited, and the people who had it were quickly discovered by the people who didn't. Cash lost value in hours, not days, as the scale of the crisis became clear, and people began to understand that cash could not solve the underlying problem. A nation that could not produce, could not deliver, could not coordinate. Paper in your pocket was only useful if someone was willing to exchange something real for it. Trade stopped. Not just international trade, the internal trade that moves goods from where they are made to where they are needed. Every supply chain in the country broke simultaneously. The just-in-time systems that modern commerce depends on, where stores maintain minimal inventory because they expect regular delivery, became catastrophic vulnerabilities. Stores emptied, not just food stores, all stores. People grabbed what they could find and carried it home, not knowing when anything would be replenished. I saw the shelves bare. I saw people standing in the spaces where food had been, looking at the emptiness as though they could not believe what they were seeing. Starvation began. I say that word carefully because I understand what it means. I have seen malnutrition in places I have served. I know what it looks like, and I saw it beginning to take hold across a wealthy, powerful nation that had never expected to face it within its own borders. People searching for food for days, not hours. Days. Families with children who had nothing to feed them. Elderly people alone in homes with no food and no way to reach anyone who might help. For some, the hunger lasted 14 days. 14 days without adequate food in a country that had been, days earlier, one of the most food-secure places on Earth. The effect was everywhere. The psychological weight of hunger compounds quickly. People lose not just energy, but judgment. Communities that depend on cooperation begin to fracture when the competition for scarce resources becomes real. The social trust that holds a community together. The assumption that your neighbor is not a threat, that you can leave your house without fear, that the person approaching you is not approaching you because they need what you have, began to erode. People lost hope. This is the part I want to describe carefully because it was not just about material things. It was something deeper. I saw it in the faces of people in the vision. The moment when hardship crosses a line and becomes something that attacks not just comfort but meaning. When people begin to ask not just, how do I survive today, but why should I survive at all? When the future, which people normally carry with them everywhere like a quiet companion, begins to feel like a threat rather than a promise. Fear took over. Families struggled to survive. Communities that had depended on the normal functioning of the world, on power and food and communication and trust, were broken. Not just strained, broken. The structures they had relied on were gone, and they had not been built to function without them. I also saw the effect on Christians, on believers, on the people who, under normal circumstances, would be the ones standing firm when others fell. And what I saw troubled me deeply. Many stopped praying. I watched it happen, and I could feel the tragedy of it, not because prayer is a ritual requirement, but because I now understood from where I was standing in that vision. Tall. Prayer was not a comfort mechanism or a tradition. It was a real and powerful force. It was connected to something active, something that could genuinely intervene in what was happening. And when people stopped, I could feel the difference. Like a light going out. Like something that had been sustaining now withdrawn. Many became afraid. Faith grew weak. The circumstances around them were so severe, so overwhelming, so contrary to any promise of safety or comfort, that the gap between what they believed and what they were experiencing became too much to hold. They began to close that gap not by standing in faith, but by letting faith shrink to match the reality in front of them. Intercession slowed. The prayers for others, the prayers that go beyond personal need, the prayers that say, I am standing in the gap for these people, even though I am also suffering. Those prayers became rare. The cries I had heard before grew louder in contrast to the silence of the people who should have been responding to them. The world seemed to be sinking into despair and many hearts were turning cold. I saw the believers struggling the most in some ways, not because they were weaker than others, but because they were more aware. They could feel the spiritual dimension of what was happening. They knew something had broken. They could sense the darkness was not only physical, and instead of that awareness driving them to prayer, it drove many of them deeper into fear. The awareness became a burden rather than a calling. I saw some who were still trying. Their hearts were heavy, but they kept going. They prayed in the dark, literally. They gathered in small groups when they could find each other. They held on to what they believed, even when everything visible was contradicting it. And I could see clearly in the vision that their prayers were not lost. They were doing something. They were not just words rising into silence. They were reaching something. They were slowing things that would have otherwise moved faster. They were protecting people they did not know, in places they had never been. But the number was small. The number of those still praying, still interceding, still holding the line of faith. It was much smaller than it should have been, and I understood that this was part of what the enemy was working toward, not just the physical destruction, the silencing of the church, the paralysis of prayer, because if the people with access to heaven stopped speaking, the path for destruction would be cleared. I realized that this was part of the bigger plan. The devil wanted to use fear to stop people from praying. He wanted to stop revival before it began. He wanted to destroy hope before it could grow into something that would push back against the tide. The physical attacks were damaging. The economic collapse was severe. But this, the silencing of faith, the freezing of prayer, this was the strategic goal behind all of it. Then he showed me the other nations, the nations that had joined in the attack, and what I saw there shifted everything I had been feeling. I had been grieving for America. The scale of the suffering I had seen, the darkness, the hunger, the fear, the broken communities, had filled me with sorrow. I had thought that what America was experiencing was the worst of it, the center of the pain. But when I saw the state of the other nations, I could not hold back my tears. What America was enduring was severe. What these nations were enduring was beyond description. Cities destroyed, not damaged, not partially struck, but destroyed. The word I keep coming back to is rubble. Street after street of rubble, of structures that had been buildings, had been homes, had been the spaces where people conducted their lives, reduced to broken material. People moving through those streets with no clear destination, because every destination they had previously known was gone. Governments failing. The institutional structures, the authorities, the bureaucracies, the supply ministries, the security forces, disintegrating under the pressure of circumstances they had not been built to manage. Not every government collapses quickly. Some hang on through extraordinary chaos. But I saw governments that were already unstable, already struggling, being pushed past the point of functionality. And when governments fail, the people who depend on them fail in ways that multiply the suffering. Chaos everywhere. Not just disorder. Chaos in the specific sense, the absence of predictability, the inability to know what the next hour would bring, the loss of the basic social architecture that allows people to move through their days without constant mortal fear. Families torn apart, not just separated by circumstance, torn. Parents looking for children across landscapes that had become unrecognizable. Children who had lost everyone, the bonds that hold families together, presence, communication, the ability to reach one another, all of it severed. I cried. Standing in that place with that view of the world, with Jesus beside me, I cried. Because I realized that this was not just about America. It was not just about the nations I had been trained to think of as adversaries or allies. It was about people. It was about the individual lives, the individual stories inside every nation. People who had not asked for any of this. People who had simply been born in a particular place, who had gone about their lives as best they could, who had no power over the decisions that were destroying the world they lived in. He showed me that in days to come, many other nations would face this same state. The spreading would not stop. The conflict's reach would extend further and further, pulling in nations that had tried to stay out of it, affecting populations that had no connection to any of the original causes. Like fire that starts in one room and fills a house and then spreads to the houses beside it, regardless of what any of those houses had done. But then he said something that I needed to hear. He told me this was not his plan for the world, that the destruction I was watching was not the design, it was the result of choices. Human choices, made in pride and selfishness and the craving for power. Choices that had been building for a long time and were now arriving at their consequence. His plan was different. His plan was alive and moving even through the destruction. Even as I watched the worst of what human choices had built, he was showing me something underneath it, something that was not dying but growing. He showed me revival, and the contrast between the vision of destruction and the vision of revival was so sharp that it almost broke me open. Revival does not look the way people expect it to look. It does not look like churches filling up in good times. It does not look like prosperity and ease drawing people toward faith. It looks like people at the end of themselves. It looks like the moment when everything that a person trusted has failed, and they turn toward the only thing left. It looks like someone kneeling on the floor of a cold, dark room with nothing, and finding something there. He showed me that in America, even in the middle of the collapse, there were people coming to faith. Not slowly, not in a trickle. In numbers that were extraordinary. People who had never prayed before, who had never thought seriously about anything beyond what was visible. Sitting in the wreckage of the life they had built and discovering that they were not alone, discovering something real in a moment when everything false had been stripped away. He showed me the same thing in Iran, in a country where faith had been driven underground, where people had whispered prayers in hidden rooms at the cost of their safety. He showed me that fire, rather than extinguishing that faith, would spread it. The hidden would become open, the whispered would become spoken. The people who had prayed in secret for years would find each other in ways that had not been possible before, because the old structures of control had been broken by the same chaos that was destroying everything else. Other nations could rise too. Not all of them, not without cost. But the possibility was real. The window was open. Even in the darkness, the door had not been closed. He showed me that the devil was pushing hard through selfish men, men who were making their calculations, moving their pieces, satisfying their ambitions. Through them, the enemy was driving the world toward war, toward destruction of the unsaved, of people who had never had a real chance to hear anything of truth. He was working to close that window before it could produce what it was capable of producing. But it was not too late. Heaven could still intervene. The intervention was real, was possible, was not theoretical. He showed me that prayers can change things, not as a slogan, as a fact. I saw it like a mechanism, not mechanical but real, in the same way that cause and effect is real. When people prayed, things shifted. Plans that were locked into motion could be slowed. Damage that was inevitable could be reduced. Lives that were marked for destruction could be spared, because something had entered the situation that the enemy's plans had not accounted for. He showed me that heavenly intervention requires earthly action. This is something I had never fully understood before. The connection between what happens in heaven and what happens on earth is not unilateral. It is not a one-way flow where heaven decides and earth receives. There is a partnership, a genuine participation. What people on earth do matters. Not because heaven is weak or limited, but because this is how it was designed. The earth was given to human beings. What happens in it is connected to the choices of the people in it. And prayer is the primary way that human beings connect their choices to what heaven can do. I saw that if believers rise in prayer, if they overcome the fear that was trying to silence them, if they push through the exhaustion and the doubt and the weight of the circumstances around them, much of what I saw could be stopped. Not all of it. The choices that had already been made, the consequences that were already in motion, could not all be reversed. But much of it could be slowed. Some of it could be stopped entirely. The scope of the destruction could be narrowed. The scale of the suffering could be reduced. The revival could still break out. The hope could still grow. The nations could be saved from total despair, not from all pain, not from all consequence, but from the total darkness that was the enemy's goal. He showed me that believers must do two things every day, not two complex things. Two simple things done faithfully, every single day, regardless of circumstance. The first is to pray for mercy over the nations, to stand in the gap, not for people they know, not just for their own country, not just for Christians, but for the nations, for the people who do not yet know him, for the people who are going to be in the path of what is coming. To ask with sincerity and with persistence for mercy, for protection to extend to people who have no idea they are being prayed for and would not ask for it themselves if they did. This kind of prayer is not natural. It is not easy. It requires something of the person praying that goes beyond good feelings or general goodwill. But it is what he asked for. The second is to pray for revival and salvation, to ask specifically that hearts turn to him, that faith grows, that the church becomes what it was designed to be in a crisis, not a shelter from the world, but a light inside it. that the people who are losing everything find the one thing that cannot be lost. He showed me that these prayers connect to something active, that they are not wishes cast into the air, but requests received by someone with the power and the willingness to act on them. He showed me that if believers do these two things daily, the plans of destruction can be slowed, not stopped entirely in every case. The consequences of long accumulated choices do not disappear overnight, but slowed. Lives saved that would otherwise be lost. Nations spared from depths of destruction they were heading toward. The difference between the worst version of what I saw and a less devastating version, that difference lived in the prayers of people who were willing to fight for others, even when they themselves were afraid. Then, suddenly, I was back. My eyes opened. I was in the hospital. Machines were beeping. Doctors were around me. 7 minutes had passed, but it felt like I had lived hours, maybe a lifetime in that other place. The hospital room felt small. Every object in it had a quality of unreality. The white walls, the plastic of the equipment, the fabric of the blankets. Like a stage set seen too closely, I lay there for a moment trying to process the distance between where I had been and where I now was. My heart was beating again. I was alive, but something in me understood, with immediate and unambiguous clarity, that I was not the same person who had lost consciousness at the desk in that operations office. Something had been placed inside me that could not be removed. Something had been shown to me that could not be unseen. I realized that what I saw was real, not a dream, not the firing of a brain under stress, not a hallucination generated by an oxygen-deprived mind. Real, with the same reality as anything I had ever experienced in 14 years of service. More real, in fact, because I had never experienced anything in those 14 years with that degree of clarity, that completeness of understanding, that absolute absence of confusion about what I was seeing and why. And it was now my responsibility to carry this message. A soldier does not choose his orders, he carries them. Whatever I felt about it, the reluctance, the awareness of how this would sound, the knowledge that people would question me, none of that changed what had been given to me to do. Even though I am a soldier, not a preacher, I knew I had to tell people. I knew I could not stay silent, not because I was looking for attention or wanted to be believed, but because what I saw was a warning with a purpose. A warning given so that it could be acted on. A warning that, if I kept it to myself, would become meaningless. You do not receive a warning so that you can keep it. You receive it so that you can pass it on. I felt fear. I will not pretend otherwise. The fear of being dismissed. The fear of consequences, both professional and personal. The fear of being wrong. The fear that I would tell people and nothing would happen, and I would have been the man who said something terrible was coming, and it never did. Or the worse fear, that I was right, that it would come, and people would remember that I had told them and had not told them soon enough. But underneath the fear was a peace, a strange peace that I had no natural reason to feel. The kind of peace that does not match the circumstances. The kind that makes you aware that it is not coming from inside you. I knew that revival is still possible. I knew that the nations can be spared if people rise in prayer. I knew that what I had seen could be influenced, not reversed entirely, but shaped, limited, redirected, but only if hearts turned to Him. I never wanted to share this. I wanted to stay quiet. I wanted to go back to being a soldier who follows orders and keeps what he knows to himself. I wanted to live my life like before, with the clarity of defined duty, with the protection of professional silence, with the ordinary hardness of a person who has seen difficult things and learned to carry them without showing them. But I cannot. What I saw is too real. What I heard is too loud in my heart. The cries of those millions of voices. I hear them when I am quiet. I hear them in the moments between sleeping and waking. I cannot unhear them. And the knowledge that something could be done, that the scope of what is coming is not entirely fixed, that prayers change things, that knowledge makes silence impossible. People need to know. They need to understand what is coming. They need to prepare, not primarily with supplies or strategy, with their hearts, with their faith, with a willingness to pray beyond their own needs and stand for people they will never meet. If you are reading this, it is not by accident. It is a warning. It is a call. The time between now and what is coming is not long. What I saw was not distant. It was near. Near enough that the preparation required is urgent, not casual. The world is about to face things no one can imagine. Nations will suffer. People will cry. The systems that people depend on will fail. The assumptions people live by will be shattered. And in all of that, the enemy will be working to silence the people who have access to heaven. Working to make fear stronger than faith. Working to make the darkness feel final. But it is not final. That is what he showed me. Even in the worst of what I saw, there was movement, there was life, there was the possibility of intervention, the reality of revival, the truth that the last word had not been spoken, that it never is. I am sharing this now because time is short. What I saw in Iran, in America, in the world. It is real, and if people rise in prayer, if they turn their hearts to Him, if they refuse to let fear become their master in the days that are coming, much of the pain can be stopped. Lives can be saved. Nations can be pulled back from the edge they are approaching. I hope this message reaches those who will listen. I hope it reaches those who will act, not with weapons or plans or human strategy, but on their knees, with persistence, with faith, with a willingness to stand for the world even when the world is falling apart around them. Because what is coming is bigger than any human plan. It is bigger than anything I have seen in 14 years of service. It is bigger than the operations I was part of, the strategies I was briefed on, the power of every nation I have ever served alongside or stood against. It is real. It is serious. It is near, and the only answer that is big enough for it is not a human one.